Hello, everyone. Just giving a second to allow folks to trickle back in, or trickle in, I should say. If you don't know me, I'm Polly. I'm the founder of Black Women Photographers, and this is Alexis, who helped me plan this event, and I'm so excited to do this because it's going to be good. Let me make sure I allow screen sharing just in case. Alexis, I'm making you co-host. Okay. Allie, I'm also making you co-host. Okay. And as always, if you'd like, you can drop in the chat where you're at while we wait for folks to trickle in. Oakland, Baltimore, love it. Chapel Hill, New York City, amazing. Brooklyn, excited for Montreal, Los Angeles, love it, love it, love it. Okay, Alexis, if you want to introduce yourself briefly, and then Allie, I'll allow you to introduce yourself. And also, if your coworker is here, they can as well introduce themselves.
Thank you.
You want to go first, Allie?
You go first. I'll follow.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Alexis. I'm a freelance photographer based in LA, and I kind of dip between documentary work, editorial, and more recently some commercial work. And I had the pleasure of meeting Allie over the summer, and she reached out and just offered some support and assistance as I was starting to try and navigate the commercial landscape. And so that's how we ended up here today. I wanted to make sure that everybody got the information they needed. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, go
Exactly.
ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allie Burke. I am a executive art producer at 72 and Sunny here in LA. I'm originally from New York. I just moved to LA 2 years ago. I've been in advertising for almost 18 years, 20 years, something like that. I never wanted to get in advertising. It just happened. And I just felt like when we started talking about this program, it just seemed like there was so much information that is so easy to explain. And it just meant everybody getting together and just talking about it and talking through the scenarios. And I'm so excited to get into the details with you guys today and talk about real world or theoretical scenarios.
Thank you both. I think I saw Kate come in. Let me find her in the participants and add her. Kate, did you want to introduce yourself as well if you're in here still?
I think she just popped in.
Give it a second.
Hi guys, sorry, I am down childcare, so running away from my children in my own house today, which is, I guess, a pandemic reality lots of people are living with. I also, similarly to Allie, knew nothing about advertising before I started and have also been in it for a shockingly long period of time. So, you know, it's fun and it's great, and it's one of the things I love about it is being able to run at a different project every time. It's never quite the same thing. So the 1984 behind me on this Zoom is, you know, from a project we were doing that's based in 1984, and the next thing will be totally different. So I think that's one of the cool things about it from our side. And then from a production perspective, you know, also just taking things that are theoretical and making them actual. So, you know, what needs to happen in that process, and how do we come up with the vision that the creative team on our side has, that the clients, you know, that we then sell to our clients, and also then how do we partner with other talent to bring that to life? And how do we preserve your evolution of our vision to make something that cuts through in culture? You know, I think one of the things that Allie and I both agree on that's a little bit of a 72 ethos as well is, you know, the world doesn't need more stuff. So how do we make stuff that's exciting and engaging, and that compels people to action, whatever that is, it makes you feel something.
Totally. That's a good way of putting it. And I would just say my other favorite thing about my job is finding an artist who takes the idea and makes it 1,000 times better through their vision, and always being on the hunt for the best possible partners for projects. That was, you know, that's the exciting part of the process for me.
Thank you both, and thank you everyone who is here and dropped your location. Oh my goodness, Amanda from Singapore, you finally made it to a talk. That's amazing. That's wonderful. And shout out to Alexis for her cover for Essence. Corinne was mentioning that in the chat. That is huge and major. And if there's time, we can ask you all about that at the end. But because we know that you two are very busy, you three are very busy, and we have so much to chat about from our session. So we started planning this like months ago. And then we also started circulating a form to the Black women photographers community about, you know, just like commercial/business 101. What did you want to know? What did you want to learn? What questions did you have? And we got a lot of great responses. And with those responses, we finally were able to just like figure out which themes we wanted to tackle first. And so today would be just like a basic intro where Alexis and Kate and Allie will be walking through some of those questions and answering. And then there's time we can do more Q&A at the end. But this is really just like part one. And so I did it as work smarter / not harder, because I feel like that's the theme that we all want to be on. And yeah, so I will allow Allie to take it away then.
Yeah, I think it would be great to hear your questions. Some of the themes we honed in on were, let's say you have the job, what comes next? Or let's say you've gotten a call from an ad agency, what next? Like, what's the thing that comes afterwards that might be a little mysterious that we can sort of make clear and walk you through? And we can start anywhere. That was sort of where we honed in on as like, where do we start the discussion so that it doesn't feel like it's not centered around a specific theme. So I'll open the floor. And I think if anyone wants to start, we can just start somewhere together. And Alexis and I can certainly riff. She's so good at sort of opening up questions to other questions. So your question might sort of spiral into others as well.
Yeah, I think, I remember just even from the sheet, I think the first one was basically, what do you do after you get the job? But I think we can back up. It's like, where are you two looking for, talent where they can, put themselves in front of these jobs? And then afterwards, once you actually get the job, or, not even just getting the job, what it entails to actually get the job. Because I know sometimes you have to send a treatment or whatever the case may be prior to even landing the job. So how do you sell yourself for that gig? I know that's a lot, but
no, I think that's great. I have the chat open now, so I can look there as well. But I think an agency's approach to looking for photographers, and I can speak for myself, I think everybody has their own style. And so for me, I feel like Instagram is like my little, like, I love searching around Instagram and just finding people and seeing the work that pops up there, and sort of trying to find little nooks and crannies of magazine articles or even personal work that I find interesting. And a lot of what I see, I can't take on face value. I need to find a way to interpret your work into the advertising forum. So let's say like you're doing a lot of projects shot on black with gels, for example, just a random example, but I know you're able to do the work that I'm looking for, but maybe it's not packaged in a way that a client who isn't able to understand the world of photography can understand. And so what I tend to do is I'll look at the body of work and I'll edit it down, and I'll present it in a very edited way so that it's sort of packaged in a way that a client can understand. So that's typically like the filter that the work out in the world goes through me before a client sees it or understands it. And I sort of talk through why I think you would be the right person for the job. But I think a lot of the places that I look are free. You know, I don't encourage photographers to spend a lot of money on promotional stuff. I find that it gets lost and it's so expensive. Like, I know how much all of that stuff is, and every dollar counts. And I think a lot of the world now is functioning on Instagram and with a website, or, you know, all of those things I think can resonate with people in my position just as much as a mailer or something. I know I get that question a lot, and I really do think that most of the free services are great. So typically, I don't find myself searching by location or hashtag per se, more about like, you know, if I see something on Boom or It's Nice That or something, I'll look at the artist and then I'll see who's following that artist. Or if I'm looking for still life, for example, maybe I'll search a hashtag of still life or food photography to help me like sort of uncover a new little nest of artists that I might not have found through the obvious channels. Sometimes I find that they're kind of like, I like to picture it like paths, like a hiking trail. Like, there's a lot of footsteps on a lot of the hiking trails, but sometimes I like to break off, and I find I see a lot of new artists when I just go off the path. Because I feel like a lot of the search engines now like take you on so many common hiking trails. It's just like a visual I usually have in my head. I've never said that out loud before, so hopefully that makes sense. So that's kind of one route. But I really don't ever, like, when I get a mailer, for example, and I like it, I'll make a note of it. And I usually put the artwork in very distinct bookmarks that I keep to help me find those artists later on when it comes time for me to access my lists of artists. But very rarely am I finding like, oh, it's the mailer that caught my attention. Like, I feel like if you've got great work and it's online, you can share it a free way, and it doesn't make a difference. It's not something that like makes it better or worse when it comes that way.
I think the other thing I would add to that, Ali, is that, you know, on the agency side, we aren't working as individuals who have all the decision-making power ourselves, right? So as the producers at an agency, we also work with the creative teams who have a vision for this, that they then work with you. They're almost your closest point of contact within the agency, because they're sort of the counterpart to the photographer, the director, internally, and then also the client. So I would say that the thing that I would argue is almost the most helpful is something that travels easily, right? What's great about Instagram is now that everybody's on Instagram, you can ping stuff around really quickly. It gets them really easily. It's very shareable. We can grab screen grabs and throw it into Google Docs. So, you know, in that way, I think it is really helpful to have things online that travel well. And, you know, and I think a good range of what your work can be, right? So even if you have 10 images from one shoot, it's better to have 2 images from each, you know, a little bit of range for each, but actually like, if this person could do this thing or that thing, because oftentimes it's like, oh, we like this idea. There's something about it that works really well with this vision we have in our heads. Can they figure out how to, you know, pull the pieces together to get us to the thing that we're trying to achieve here? If it's not something we, you know, see sort of one for one on your portfolio.
Yeah, and I think jumping off of that too, Alexis, I think that's a great jumping off point from what Kate said. The decision makers in our role. So like, we're the first, like Kate said, we're the first point of contact. We're the ones who you would be speaking to us first, but we've got to present you to the creative teams, and then the creative teams in partnership with the production teams then have to present to the client. So there are layers that are important to understand, so that like, it's not necessarily about the producer or the art buyer or not liking your work, or maybe everybody on our team thought you were the best person for the job, but we couldn't sell it through for, you know, for whatever reason. There's so many. Makes sense to connect with creative directors. Yeah, so I think it's good to get on art directors' radars, creative directors as well, and producers as well. I think both in tandem, that's like a really great way to diversify who you're reaching out to. That would definitely make you connected with all the right players, with everyone you just mentioned, Alexis, in the chat.
And for those who missed that, so Ali just answered Alexa's question was, who are the decision makers? So they are the first step, and then there's several levels to this. So first is them, and then she mentioned a few other people that you should also get to know, are directors and creative directors. Renika asked, and Aspen, I see your question, we'll get to that as well. Renika asked, for projects with a larger scope/budget, are you looking for a certain level of past client work versus someone who has less experience doing commercial work? Is there a threshold for how established a person should be for a certain type of project?
I think that's a really great question. So sometimes with a project that is just so massive that it makes my brain hurt, I like to rely, especially now with COVID, I find sometimes it's better to work with an artist who's repped by an agent. And so the reason why this applies to this question, and I'll sort of circle back to it, is so with a certain level of past client work, in the way I categorize that in my mind is like, is this person more established versus someone who's more of an up and comer? And there are plenty of people who are established without agents. But what we're looking for right now on some of the really bigger jobs with a larger budget is really, really good production support. Because the COVID aspect of it is so detail oriented and requires someone with a really high level of thinking and being able to adapt and think about things like medically as well as production. And so that's kind of the lens now that I really start to hone in now on, like, who am I going to for this project? Can we handle it together? Because it's extra pressure on production. It's like this side of production, it's extra pressure on the photographer side of production, and it's extra stress on the photographer. And there are really big photographers right now that I've stopped putting up for jobs because I don't think that they can handle it. They refuse to quarantine, even though we've offered to quarantine and keep them safe and things like that. Like they just haven't seemed to adapt in a way that doesn't really make sense to me, but also I don't like have the time to try and work it out with them. Like there are plenty of people who want to work right now, and obviously our intention is to keep you safe. So just to circle back to your question, Renika. So I think the threshold, I don't have a threshold. It's really more about the production support. And then in terms of like what they've done in the past, like the amount of work that they've done in the past, I don't like to, I can see past the things that like you might or might not have done. I feel like I have a good ability to see the potential in someone's work, maybe if they haven't done everything, but they've done some things, and then also find a way to shape that work into a way that can convince the client to sign on or the creative team to sign on. But I do think there is some validity to saying, if you've done a lot of celebrity work, for example, or you shoot cars a lot, I would feel a lot more comfortable knowing that we have a car project coming up and it's the right fit, rather than making you do something that you're not comfortable with. Because that always, like, we always want to fit into your sweet spot. Like, we never want to make you do something that you also don't do a lot and maybe don't love as much. Because I always feel the work is so much better when you also just love the subject matter as well. So just finding that, like, the right pairing. So I don't necessarily have a threshold. Sometimes it's client driven as well. Like, if a client is a lot, I wouldn't want to find a photographer who doesn't have a lot of experience and throw them into the fire with a client who just is going to overwhelm everybody. I think there's like a lot of personality pairings in these things that make a big difference to the success of the work. So hopefully that was a good round answer for you. I don't want to miss Aspen's question because I feel like that was a good one as well. Would you guys be okay if I went back to that one quickly?
Yeah. So Aspen asked, how does one get on your radar?
Yeah, I think with emails, just like a lot of pictures Like, I don't know. I was always upset when we went from picture books to just like a lot of reading. Like, we're pictures people, we're so visual. Like, just send me everything you've got. I think it's not necessarily about the 10 shots from that shoot you did. It's maybe the 2, like Kate said. Like, I think it's about editing it down to your absolute favorite things, and sending it in an email. Maybe a hi and where you're based, but like, other than that, I think just as many pictures as possible. I would also keep sending it if you don't hear back from the person. It's not a personal thing. A lot of times I'll just click on the link, I'll bookmark it so I know exactly which category to put you in so I can find you again later when it's time. But it's not a personal thing to not hear back. I have a friend of mine who's a photographer who's like just so discouraged by not hearing back. And I always tell him, like, I promise you, like 5 people emailed me today and I didn't write back, and it had nothing to do with them. Like, I just didn't have time to write back, but I bookmarked them all. So just if it's any consolation, just know that it's not a personal thing. And I think it's worth continuing to send the work as your work evolves as well.
So like,
I think to that though, one thing, sorry, Polly, is that you are sending it to people who are getting multiple emails like this today. So I do think one of the things is like, what's the lead image? What's the 2 or 3 lead images? Like, to Allie's point of like, don't make it a lot of reading. It's like, here's the vibe, here's the stuff I want to do. This is me. Because then, you know, sometimes if you have the time, you'll click farther and go through it. Or to Allie's point, you know where to put it. But if it's something where I have to take steps to figure out what you're about, I may not be having a day that allows for that, in which case, like, it may get pushed to the back or may get missed. So I think lead with the headline, you know, like, assume that's like, this person might have 5 minutes to read this, maybe 30 seconds. What do you want them to take away from that?
Yeah, just being strategic about it for sure.
and then ask a follow-up. How often should one follow up? Like every 4 to 8 weeks? What would be best before it's too much?
I think it's when you have new work. I think, to me, that's when it's, you know, if there's been enough time that you reached out and you've got new work to follow up on, that feels like a real way to be like, hey, I also shot this. I thought you might be interested. Like that, there's so much validity to that. And it means you're putting in, you know, like you're continuing to do what you love to do. I think ultimately what we like to see, and what I struggle with sometimes, is some artists will come and be like, well, here's my advertising work. And I was like, I just want to see what you like to do. You don't need to show me your advertising work. I find it's more interesting to see the work that you absolutely love to do. Like, if you love to shoot, you know, I don't know, landscapes, I want to see that, because that's where I feel like you are going to give me like the most interesting work, because all the love is behind it. You know, when that landscape photographer comes to me, like shooting, you know, things that is like so clearly not in their wheelhouse, or it just feels a little bit forced because it's advertising work, I'm kind of like, well, what do you want to do? What do you really want to do? That's the stuff that I want to see. So maybe it's like following up meant that you shot the things that you love to do, and you're continuing to share that new stuff with those people.
As a new photographer who hasn't received any work yet, what is the first step in putting in your work out there? Is putting your work on social media the first good step?
I think so. I think it's just starting somewhere, and then giving yourself the ability to change and adapt, and, you know, see what people are responding to. Like, a lot of times, if you put something out there in the world, people might respond to the thing that you never expected them to respond to. And there's like something so interesting about the relationship that people have with who you think you are and how the world sees you. And sometimes that shapes your career in new and interesting ways. Like, wow, I never realized that I was good at that. Like, that was the image I thought was the worst of them, but maybe there's something there, and maybe I can lean into that creative idea and go down that path. Like, I always think that that's the unexpected stuff that you never anticipate happening. And that's where all that cool creativity lies. Seeing what people respond to. And like, if you put things out there and you don't feel comfortable with it, or you're insecure about it, like, I think it's okay to kind of go through like, how did it feel to share that stuff? And what do I want to share versus feel like I have to share, and trying to push yourself that way as well. So just like putting the stuff you feel best about and just starting somewhere. I think that first hurdle is really something to overcome. And I think like as artists, it's something we overcome daily, hourly. Like putting yourself out there is difficult. And just getting over that first hump, I think is a good first step to prove to yourself that you're ready to share the work with the world.
Following that, there's a few more follow-ups. So you mentioned IG. Within Instagram, do you recommend having separate accounts if you have varied interests, or can it all be one, just, big account with everything? And then two, how much, we mentioned this before our call, how much do you, put into consideration weight on social media presence when considering someone, when hiring them?
So I'll start with the multiple account question first.
Okay.
I kind of think you can keep one account. I feel like there are people who can do a lot of things well. I don't really like when people say, well, you're only this and you can only do that. Like, I think that's silly. I think you should just, be the things you're interested in. Like those things are the patchwork that makes you unique. And I think your unique interests make you stand out from other people. So I wouldn't be discouraged that you need to have multiple, like if you don't need multiple accounts to attract one person. I think just be your whole self in one place. And then you might find that your work evolves in its own way. And it's kind of interesting to see it all in the tiles and be like, oh, this is where I was here and this is where I am now. Like maybe I'm leaning more in this direction. It's like, it's all an evolution. You don't need to be everything at once. I think it can just sort of like, let's see who you are today and then see how it evolves.
I love that.
I agree. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Just to build on that, I think it's also helpful because a lot of times we're not looking for maybe the exact thing that we do. So understanding what the range is really helpful in terms of like, okay, well, if we take, 3 of these but then this thing that they did over here, it's kind of interesting. So how those things marry together, and I think that Allie is 1,000,000% right that it's putting out the best version of you and what you can create and what you love to create. That's the most important thing. I think I receive a lot of emails where people are really focused on a client that we have and they say like, oh, I think my work would be a great fit for this client or that client. And to be honest, that's very rarely how I filter things, in part because yes, some of our brands do have a kind of general aesthetic or tone, but really the thing that I care the most about is partnering with somebody who's an amazing talent. And then, sometimes our creatives and our brands totally differ from what they were doing. Say they were doing very sort of raw documentary style, and then we have an idea that we love that's much slicker. It's like, you might be right for that, even though it's not the brand you thought. So I think it's more about what's your skill set and how can your skill set work with us as an organization, as a group of creatives to make something amazing, more than, I want to work on Activision. I love this thing on the NFL, so I think that that's kind of from an orientations perspective. I think it's more about you being the best you than you trying to fit us.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Kate, because, sometimes you'll have, I keep using the still life example, but like you've got a still life example and you've got this beautiful portrait of someone outside. And I can prove that you can shoot in a studio environment by your still life setup. But if we're shooting people in the studio, those two examples, while different, can help me prove my case. Like, okay, they know lighting. This was in the studio. And yes, this portrait was shot in natural light. They're able to do both. So when the person's in the studio, I'm not worried about them being able to achieve that. So like, there are different ways to prove the point through different kinds of images.
Thank you. I will do one more social question. I see your comment, Mario. I really think you should definitely have a presence on social in addition to websites. Just put your content on all the things. I feel like where it makes sense, and just really have that strategy of, what you want each platform to do for you. And your, because every platform serves a different purpose. Oh, sorry, y'all. My Netflix restarted itself. Ooh, let me turn that off. And then I'll go to Christina's TikTok question, and then I'll get to Aspen's in Alexis's budget and rates question. So Christina asks, how do you view creators using TikTok if you're making content around photography in the form of nice visual films rather than like normal TikTok/trend videos? So stuff that's aimed at other photographers rather than anything you expect clients to hire you for/see. Is it bad to just be on that platform while it's still in its infancy stage?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that's super interesting. I feel like all of that inspiration, it's just as valid being on TikTok. I feel like, I think that's a great place for anything visual, even musical, to come into play. Like, I think it has a whole other dimension around Instagram, which feels like sometimes flatter than TikTok, and TikTok is more fun and playful. I think that that's fantastic. And I think if you have stuff on TikTok, maybe also having it on Instagram so that you can reach, cross pollinate those two places as well, so that you're reaching all those people. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with TikTok over any of the other sites. I think that's great.
Definitely. Thank you for your question, Christina. So Aspen asks, how do you navigate the question of budget when bidding for jobs, especially when the client is so hesitant to give a number immediately?
That's a really great question. I was so glad. I was hoping to talk about this because I feel like it applies in so many different aspects of just working in general for anyone, even if it's like your uncle or like, I feel like as artists, we're approached by a lot of people to do things, not necessarily only advertising agencies. So I think the first question should always be, where is the image or the content going to live? And so there are three things that I think play into that initial thought around, what is my rate for this? What is my usage for this? So you can differentiate sometimes your day rate, like what does it mean for you to come to this place to shoot for that day? And then your usage. And so the usage is, where is it going to live? How long is it going to live there? And where geographically, will this end up? So is it online only? Is it going to be billboards? Is it going to be in a magazine? Knowing where it will end up is going to basically shape your sense of budget. So the biggest cost driver of budgets is typically your rate and the usage. And so I would start there. And I think once you come to a conclusion around that number, you have to build in your fundamentals of like, okay, I've got to rent equipment. I've got to get people there to support me, your assistant or digital tech. And this is what the location is going to cost. Maybe everyone needs to be COVID tested. And so all of those hard costs will really shape a true number that you don't have to be insecure about, that you can really talk to, so that when you come to them with a total number, you can explain how you got there and also show that you understand the business. So I think that those are some key ways to start thinking about like what number you want to come to the table with. Did I miss anything there? Oh, and retouching costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Alexis's question is similar to that. As inquiries come in, are there ways for us to begin to wrap our heads around standard/fair usage terms and rates, so we have a solid foundation we can negotiate from?
Totally. I also think the number of images that those people will use is really important. If they're walking away with an entire hard drive of your day, or if they're walking away with 5 images. So like, using all of those factors. So it's like, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about something like real. So we have someone, they're shooting for us for the day. They're handing over an entire hard drive, and the client wants to use those things for an entire year for all media, excluding broadcast, for example. So being able to, that's a lot of usage. It's a lot of images. It could be upwards of 100 some odd images from your shoot from that day. It's a lot of usage. They could use it anywhere. It could be a billboard. It could be on packaging. It could be in a print ad. That's a lot of unknowns. And so that's something to consider. And 1 year is a pretty significant amount of time. It's not a ton, but it's enough that if you saw your thing in a lot of places, like where would you think you would set that value? And what is the brand? Is it a big brand? Is it a small brand? Where do you fit in to their overall marketing strategy? Like, Do they have tons of people shooting for them? Is this a really big deal for them to hire you? Like thinking about it in the context of like who that brand is too, because ultimately you want the job. And I think it's about how you shape your conversation too. I think being able to say, this is what I think it should be, but I'm open to having a discussion with you. So like how you use your words around that, I think is an important way to keep the conversation open so that you can, you want the job ultimately, unless you don't, because sometimes you can price yourself out because you don't want the job too. It's a way of not doing the job, but also not saying no. So I think sorry, go ahead. Do you have something?
No, go ahead.
So I think all of those factors, like I can't put a number to it because I don't know what the brand is, but if it's a big brand, I do think that you should be comfortable saying, well, I think I'm worth $4,500 a day for this particular thing. And if you're going to use my images anywhere, I'm going to charge you an additional amount for the usage. Maybe that's an additional, 2 days of work. So maybe that's another $9K that I'm going to charge you for the usage. So it's all dependent on those things, but hopefully those give you like those sliding scales to sort of move up and down to find a number that you're comfortable with. I don't think you should feel uncomfortable asking for what you think you deserve, but just like a little bit of that context and education is important because not all the brands that you recognize are big. And when they come to you to do work, like for example, Isabel Marant, the designer, her work is so cool and their advertising is so cool, but I happen to know it's a really, really small company and there's like 6 people that work there. So that's, okay, so they don't have a ton of money, but they think they're really creative about what they do in their marketing strategy. But I know that it's not a huge company, sort of like doing that kind of homework, I think is important and gives you a good sense of like, all right, I understand the psychology around what the conversation was with that person before they came to me. So hopefully that wasn't a ramble and hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, so there's no number, there's no one number, size fits all when it comes to rates because of all these other factors. So once you have a rate in mind, Aspen asks, how do you negotiate your rates and copyright buyouts? What are, and you already just touched on this, there's no really, I guess you could say there's any general ballpark ranges, but there is really no one size fits all.
Right. But, a buyout, for example, giving it away, it also depends on the value to you, right? So like if you've got an image that you love and you just feel like it could be used in a lot of different ways, or you feel like someone might want to license that image down the road. Like Alexis comes to me, she's working, she's my client. She comes to me and she says, hey, do you have any images of women on a bench? Because we're looking to license a picture of a woman on a bench. And oh God, I've got this woman on a bench, but it was a buyout for this other company. I can't relicense it to you. Like, I think knowing where your images could end up living in the future is an important approach to this with buyouts. And so the value to you, like knowing I could give this to someone else potentially. So if this were to be a buyout, this would be the cost to me to lose it, to lose the ability to relicense it. Maybe it would have been licensed a few times for $750. So the buyout for that one particular image times 3, maybe we're at like $2,500 for the buyout of that image, or $2,000, what does it mean to you for those images to be given away? And if it's like, okay, it's all images of fruit, I don't think anyone's going to want these. The buyout is not as important to me. It's not that I don't charge anything for it, but at least I can feel like when I project what I could have made from this image in the future, that it kind of would have started and ended with this job. And so like you hand that off and it's a little bit less of a guess. Like, okay, this was very specific. This work was very specific to this client. It's okay that it's a buyout, but this is my cost. So those are some things to think about with the usage rates. But buyouts is a big amount of time, to make sure that you're feeling compensated for the image being gone forever.
Thank you. Along the lines of the shooting day, circling back to that, I hope everyone's following along.
Yes.
So along the lines, okay, so you got the shoot, you got the gig. What percentage of cost do you need in advance prior to a job before shoot day? So what are the things photographers should be mindful of when it comes to the payment and when it comes to contracts, basically, is what I'm asking.
Totally. I think that's a great question. Okay. So you've got a budget. Let's say for argument's sake, you've got a budget of $10,000. You should always at least get 50% of that upfront before the shoot day. And by 50%, it's 50% of expenses. So you wouldn't be getting your day rate upfront, but anything you need to lay your money out for, you should get an advance for. So some companies can't advance, but I would really push extremely hard to get an advance, because for that to fall on an individual photographer or a photographer without production support is a very big deal. It's a lot of money. And I do think for the expectation to be for you to front it is a little unfair, but I understand that certain companies have certain capabilities. So we've got a $10,000 budget. That's my expenses only. I would get $5,000 of that up front. And you can start to pay out your vendors who are asking for costs up front, and maybe pay your assistant because they, you don't want them to wait 60 days to get paid, for example. But then you'd follow up once the job is finished with the remainder of the costs, with all of your backup and receipts, and you can bill the second half of that with your day rate with that second bill. I feel like there was another part of that question, Polly.
Yeah. Another one was just another part of the question was, in terms of the contract, are there other things that people should be looking out for
in the contract? Okay, so I do think yes, the contract is really important. I think all of the usage terms I just mentioned are the things that are so important in a contract. Where is it going to live? How long is it going to live there? You should make sure that even if the client's really casual about it, you should just make sure it's on paper. That is you always got to point back to the paperwork and the contract. And so I'm trying to think of what else in the contract. Insurance is really important. Are you expected to carry insurance? If so, do you bring a production company on board to help you cover your own insurance, or is it worth it for you to start having your own insurance? I know these things might sound like a lot, especially when you're first starting out, but it's important to keep in mind as the jobs become more complicated, that suddenly you might cross the threshold of like, okay, I'm going from just shooting these things on my own to needing more support, and being able to understand where that threshold is and start to be able to advocate for yourself with the clients who might be coming to you and saying, I need to pay for insurance to cover my people, or I'm going to bring this production company on board, all of which have money associated with it, and I'm going to charge you for those things. So those are really important things to keep an eye out for in the contracts. I think that's pretty much the scope of it. Something else might come up in these questions too that if they do, I'll make sure to mention the contract thing again.
Alexis asks, how do you navigate contracts with clients that are pushed through production companies? She recently had one that caused an issue because their boilerplate language was work for hire.
Yes.
Had language like I was an employee, which wasn't initially agreed upon.
Totally, Alexis. We're actually just going through this at the agency as well. So our legal team at the agency had a contract, and that was for film. And we were sort of adapting it to be for photography. And those things are different. Photography and film are so different in ways that are distinct and very language specific. So that's when especially the contract comes into play. And work for hire is essentially a buyout. So in our world, that's a buyout. So they should be paying for a buyout. But so that those words work for hire are really important to notice and to make sure are either not there because it should be based on usage, or that the client understands that work for hire means that they're going to have to pay for the image to be owned by them. It's a really, really great point, and something that could be lingering in a contract that you don't even notice, or that the client might not even notice is there. But that you should supersede with your own usage terms. Like, no, you said this is only going to be 6 months in magazines only. That's exactly what it should be. And we should, you cross out the language and you send it back to the client and say, well, this isn't work for hire, it's usage. You should feel comfortable really digging into the language and, highlighting or circling and sending it back to client and being like, I'd love to sit down and talk to you about this. I have some questions about the contract. I think it's healthy to ask questions about a contract. Don't hesitate. You're not difficult or anything. I think if anything, it's a good learning for you. It's a good learning for the client. Maybe there's something lingering there that they didn't notice was left from another job or something. So don't expect the contracts to always be right or right for you. And a back and forth is totally an okay thing.
Thank you. And going back to the budget really quickly. So when a photographer creates a budget, is it generally expected that they include the location and permit costs?
Typically, yes. So it depends on if you're bringing on a production company or not. So let's say it's just Allie, just me. I'm a photographer. It's going to be a pretty nimble crew, me and two assistants at digital tech. And we've got to figure out how to shoot in this house or outside this house. Yeah, I would definitely include prep days for figuring that stuff out. The location and permitting, definitely. Maybe you hire a PA to help you with it. It's a pretty small amount of money that a client can wrap their heads around, like if you do need the production support. But let's say I was going to have a production company on board, that would be something that would fall under their estimate. And maybe your two estimates get shown together to the client. So you've got your fees, maybe your team, and then the production company will have all the production stuff, and those two things would go together to the client.
Amazing. So now you have the job, you got the job, you delivered everything that you need to deliver. It's done, it's a done deal. What comes next in terms of like, how do you secure those clients as like a returning client? You know, what would you look for like a follow-up, like a thank you note, a card, in order to keep the clients coming back?
Well, so you've got the job, and let's say you haven't had the shoot yet. I think being collaborative and a team player on the shoot is key. I think being able to adapt, knowing how things change so rapidly with photography and production, and being able to adapt with the client and have the client as your partner, will make everyone's life easier, but also being able to protect yourself and know your boundaries. Like, okay, if there's another shoot day, like I'm going to have to charge another shoot rate, a shoot day rates, and being able to quantify what those changes might mean to you. And then in order to retain those clients, I would say being organized with your work, making sure everything's buttoned up, and you did a good job, like that's going to bring the client back to you. I don't think you need to just, maybe a nice thank you card is a nice gesture. I think just across the board, I feel like my mom would agree with that, but I don't think you'd like need to do anything other than just give it your all and be present and, try and do your best. And sometimes working for someone, you realize you don't want to work with them again. And that's okay too. Like sometimes not all of those relationships are okay. And sometimes you feel like not great about how it went, or how that person treated you. And I think like, especially now, not everybody's going to be a great fit, or a great partner. And maybe you work with those people less and you start trying to put yourself out there to other people, or maybe you need a break, but that's okay too. Not everything's going to go perfectly. It's not your fault necessarily if it doesn't go well. And if they don't get back to you also for another job right away or at all, it doesn't mean that you didn't do a good job, because brands are also constantly evolving. And for them, like going back to the same person means they're not moving forward. Some people think that way, but it's not. There's a lot of factors that go into getting a job. So there's also a lot of factors to getting the next job. So hopefully that's helpful. I don't think that there's anything you need to do outside of just like being a good partner and sending a thank you email. That would be sweet.
Thank you. Alexis asks, do you all expect photographers to come with their own producers as part of their crew, or do you all have an internal producer working on set alongside the photographer and their team?
I think photographers should have a producer in mind. I don't think it's always necessary. Depending on how much money a job can take. I think that if the budget's only going to be $5,000 and you don't need a lot of production support, I think it's okay that you don't have a producer on the project. But I think you should have a person you trust in your mind that is going to be organized and be able to handle the logistics, so that if you do need to lean on someone, that person is there for you. And there isn't really an internal producer. Like in our world, technically, like if some production things fall on me, like I end up doing it because it is definitely part of my job to, fill in the blanks. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to bring a producer on to do A, B, and C. I'll just do it right now. But a lot of times we're so focused on 10 other things that the production logistics, like, okay, they're on set right now, this needs to be done right now. Like, you need that person there to help you. If there's like someone bugging you on set, like, a guy's walking by and starting to harass the team, like having a producer sort of be the buffer is helpful with some of the conversations too. Like, oh, my producer can't do this, so I think we might need another $500 to do X, Y, and Z. It's like it's just like a good support system for you. So having that person in mind when the job is right for it is a good thing to not have to first think about when the job comes. Okay, so it's like an assistant, is what you're saying. Yeah, I think it could be everything from like a person who's, a singular person who's the producer to a production team or a production company. I mean, there are plenty of small production companies where it's like 2 people, 5 people, much more. But just knowing like who you can lean on should you need it, whether it's one individual person or a company, is just it's a good way to know that when your jobs do cross that threshold to something a little bit bigger that needs the support, you know who you're going to call. And maybe you have an establishing conversation with them in advance, being like, hey, I'm a photographer. I'd love to just like introduce myself. And I've got some big jobs potentially coming and I want to see if this could be a good fit. Any advice for those who want to maybe transition into this commercial workspace? Wedding photography. Oh, okay. Advice for transition. Yeah, I think that if you're transitioning from wedding photography to commercial work, I think that's a natural transition. Actually, I feel like a lot of people do that. You're familiar with contracts. Like a lot of the wedding world is contract based. Even if it's a little bit more straightforward in a way, I do think that you've taught yourself a lot of that work. You understand like setting your boundaries on the shoot day, understanding who like your talent are, who you're trying to please. Like the wedding photography world is like, you've got your client. You've got your client also has other people who are going to weigh in, like the grandpa and the dad and all the things. Like, I think that's a perfect segue into being like, oh, I know how to handle this situation. I wasn't expecting this, but we're going to pivot and we're going to figure out a way to make beautiful shots. So I think that the advice I can really give you is just try and start tailoring your work away from wedding to potentially the commercial work that you're interested in, so that you're able to resonate with the clients that you're trying to attract. But other than that, I feel like you've got like a lot of the background of what it takes to be a commercial photographer working in the wedding world. Brittany asks, how do you navigate relationships with photographers who are also film directors with their own production companies? Sometimes it seems we have to separate the two when approaching contractual work and services provided. Navigate relationships with photographers who are also film directors. So you are, Brittany, you talking about like just people in your circle, or? Brittany, do you want to unmute yourself to clarify? Sorry to put you on the spot. I just want to make sure to answer. Okay, so people in your circle. I don't think you have to separate the two. I think that like for so long, photography was photography and film was film. And then all the people in photography who had been doing it forever suddenly realized they needed to do film in order to get jobs, because the film was like an integral part to the production day. And like everyone was trying to throw everything they possibly could into the production day. And then, so those still photographers were just basically taking still pictures that like moved. And you're like, this is not interesting. Like we need more than this in order to quantify this as like a film component. Like it needs to be something just a little bit more with a concept and those sorts of things. So I think that those people are, I think that those worlds can be together. The film directors with their own production companies is tricky because a lot of times they're not as willing to bring a photographer from the outside in. So I'm sort of trying to answer this, break apart the question a little bit and talk about some relevant stuff to our industry. Because a lot of times you have to shoot stills on a broadcast set. So a lot of days now, like we've got a film going on, we've got a commercial being filmed, and we need a still photographer there to capture the process, not capture the process, capture the content, capture the celebrity, whatever it may be. And so the production companies are not always that great at having someone who's not union or not in the film world come in and leverage that set for stills. So that's when it becomes more of an issue and a relationship to navigate. And some production companies are better than others at understanding what the photographer does and does not need in order to integrate into that set. And so that, hopefully I'm answering your question, Brittany. That is where I find some of the friction begins with those worlds coming together, because we are such different content creators, but also like functioning in the same way. Like, why can't a photographer come to the film set and shoot stills? Like, we're not going to be in the way. Where, you know, there are ways to do it where it's absolutely not a problem at all, but somehow certain film like production companies just make it a lot more complicated than it needs to be. So hopefully that was a good, let me know in the chat if you feel like that answered your question, or if you want to articulate any other points to it.
Okay, thank you. Alexis asked, what does the bidding process look like for y'all? What do y'all expect for photographers who are bidding for a job?
Okay, so sometimes we need to bid more than one photographer for a job. And so what we call that is triple bidding. And some companies actually require it, like legally, that they were able to look at multiple photographers for a job and compare costs. Because a lot of the companies have cost consultants or people who act like cost consultants, and they're like, well, this retouching is way too high. We always pay $1,000 an image. And this person's charging way too much. So maybe we'll go with this photographer because their costs are much more reasonable, or maybe we can get this photographer's costs down. But being able to see the multiple bids against each other is a way for companies to be able to understand that they're getting a good value. And so when we bid, should we need a triple bid or not a triple bid at all? Let's say we know exactly who we want. We go into it talking about the production realities. It's going to be one day on location. We talk about it in detail. Then they go and work on the bid with on their own or with a production company, make sure that the numbers are tight and that they're covering everything that needs to be covered. They come back and we review the bid together. Maybe the producer will say, hey, you know, I don't think we need, I don't think the wardrobe person needs any prep, like, or, you know, one day of prep, not 3, you know, and you'll go back and forth about the things that maybe the client will flag or that you notice aren't in line with the production realities of the job. And then once it's ready to go, we present it with your work to the client and the conversation with the client. So then it's us talking directly to the client about those things. And the producer might come back to you and say, hey, listen, I think that we might need 1 shoot day versus 2 because this is too expensive. And we might have to rethink about how we're approaching the production of this job. Maybe we've overcomplicated it. Maybe the client, you know, doesn't have the appetite to spend that much. And you really have to work with the producer as a partner to get the numbers where they need to be. So sometimes those questions back to you might be related to the other people who are bidding, or it might be related to something the client is pointing out as something that they want to change.
Thank you so much. I see your question, Ashley. It really depends, again, because everything is different. So sometimes you may have a budget for the talent, and if so, then you'll use whatever budget for the talent is to pay, or because sometimes you even have to find the talent and present that in the bid. But I'm not sure if Ali, you want to expand on that really quickly.
Yeah, sometimes in the advertising world, sometimes the agency pays the model as well. They pay them through a company called Extreme Reach, which will pay their taxes and it's a little bit more of their job is to specifically pay talent. So it really depends on the client, the agency, and the job. So that's a really good question to ask. When the job comes, I think you would, in the line item of talent, say, who's paying the talent? I think that's a great question because it's not always you. And a lot of times when you can put that back on the agency to do that work, it makes your numbers look lower too. Sometimes it's about perception, even if you can talk to why your numbers are lower, like being able to know who could pay who is a good production question for sure.
Thank you. Are there any like unspoken rules in this industry on your end that maybe we should be aware of?
Unspoken rules. It's a pretty broad question. I would say for sure. I think every industry has kind of unspoken rules. Let me go through. Maybe I'll think about the process of a job and talk about unspoken rules. So we get an idea, and then the creative team puts together like a concept that we then sell through to the client. And along that process, we're thinking of the photographers who could be great for that job. And so some of the unspoken rules would be, if I were to reach out to you about a job that we're in the concepting phase about, you shouldn't share that idea with anyone else. I think at that point, it's pretty confidential. Some companies might have you sign an NDA so that you can't, it just basically limits your ability to share that with anyone else. Because with advertising, the idea is the commodity. And so if anyone else were to find out about the idea, then they could take it. And so that's kind of an unspoken rule, but also if you sign an NDA, it's not unspoken, it's the rule. So that's one thing. Then I would say some unspoken rules are, once you're in conversations with an agency or you're client facing in some of the conversations, to understand like the things that should and should not be discussed on the call with clients. Like if you're only talking about creative, don't bring up costs. I think understanding who you need to direct your questions to might be an unspoken rule at that stage. And then when you're on set, I think, being able, sometimes in our case, sharing the set with film, the unspoken rule is like being able to be flexible. And sometimes you're waiting around for a while before you have your opportunity to shoot, and just really being patient, knowing that everybody, it's obviously a priority that you're there and you're shooting things, but the unspoken rule of just like taking a deep breath and knowing that it's kind of going to be annoying that you're waiting around, but like, you're being paid to be there. Everybody wants you to shoot, but like everyone's working against it. Everyone's up against the timeline. So just kind of like taking a deep breath and knowing that you like going with the flow is going to benefit everybody. And then I would say respect with the talent, being able to understand like what is and is not acceptable with talent, just really like respecting people's spaces, and even the same thing goes with client, like understanding like the distance is helpful, and like ultimate respect with everybody until you're more familiar. Really like taking your time to ease into relationships. I know a lot of that is kind of unspoken, and one of those things that like you either like get it or you don't, but it's kind of worth pointing out that I think taking your time with relationships and being comfortable with people allows you to like maintain that level of professionalism that, I think just like taking your time with that stuff and not assuming everyone's your friend. I don't know, that sounds kind of mean, because obviously you want to be warm with people, but it's just an unspoken thing, like taking your time with the relationships and understanding like, all right, that client's really not that friendly. Like, I'm not going to go chit chat with them. I'm going to focus on the work, and I'm going to be working all day. And also like really putting the time in, like if it's a 10-hour day, like you're going to be working 10 hours, not going off and checking your phone. And, I think some of those things it sounds so silly to say out loud, but it is kind of an unspoken thing that if I have an opportunity to bring it up right now, like I'm thinking about it, and could be one of those things that no one tells you about per se. Hopefully I touched on everything.
Yes, that was great. Thank you. One last question from Alexis, and we'll probably just take one or two more questions. So if you have any other burning questions, please drop it in the chat, because I want to be mindful of time since we've already reached the hour. And again, this is really just part one. So Alexis asked, when do you all, I cannot talk today. When do y'all expect photographers to present treatments? If I'm presented a client brief, should I just stick to what the agency/client has asked for, or present a treatment with my interpretation as well? Sorry, creative brief, not client brief.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I was hoping we would get to that today. So when a producer reaches out to you about a job, I think knowing, obviously they're super interested, they want to make sure you're available for the time. I really think it's healthy for a photographer to start thinking about a treatment. I don't think that you should, hire people to do a treatment. I think it's just like, what are the visual images that are coming to mind for this client so that you can put together a little bit of a mood board. With that being said, we're approaching, this now a little bit differently than we did a year ago. A lot of times we would have everybody do a treatment. And again, this is more film based than photo, but sometimes it really is helpful for photographers to do treatments. I don't ever expect a treatment, but when I get it, it's like, oh, this is so great to be able to see the vision, like, because we're all such visual people in this way and not just assume that they understand what we mean. And obviously we put a creative brief together with our vision, but then how that's processed through your brain is so great to see a creative brief. But that being said, we used to like expect people to do a brief, a treatment in film. And what we're finding is that people who don't have the support to do a treatment, we're asking people with different levels of support behind them to do treatments. And so you have an established director or a photographer, for example, who has an agency behind them and they put a treatment together and it looks amazing. And then you have someone who's an independent person who's up and coming, having to hire someone or to spend like a couple days over revving on putting a treatment together. And then maybe the job goes to the established person because they had that support. To us, it's kind of like, is that the most even playing field? Like if we're really giving people the even ability to get a job, if we're looking at this, like we want to give everybody the ability to get a job, regardless of the support behind them, we didn't feel like it was the right approach. And so what we started to do was offering the ability to like pay a small fee to treat. And especially when you're being asked to treat, so that you have the ability to spend the time away from other work potentially to do it, or help someone put it together for you. Maybe they're laying it out graphically, someone you know who's good at that. And giving everybody the even ability to do that and bring their best selves to the work, rather than creating like a hurdle from the first ask. So again, with photography, it's not really expected. This is more of a film thing, but it's always really, really great to get a sense of your images and having just like the ability, like the bank of images in your minds and like all the, inspiration pulls and things. Like, I think even just a one pager is something helpful that can help make sure that everybody's vision is aligned. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it was super great. Thank you. What are some things that, just to wrap it up, what could we do maybe starting today, just to get the ball rolling on maybe if we want to work for a commercial or a creative agency like 72 and Sunny? What are the things that maybe we can start doing on our end? You already suggested a few things like, getting on Instagram, sprucing up your portfolio. But are there any other tips that you'd like to share before we go?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, shoot what you love to shoot. Don't shoot because you think it's what someone else wants to see. Put that work online in the way that you're most comfortable. Even if it's in small steps or you're sharing it with friends only and just slowly putting yourself out there, or if you're more bold, really just like making sure that the way you're representing yourself online, you just feel really good about, and less is more, for sure. And then if you feel like there's something that you haven't shot that you want to shoot, finding scrappy ways to do it and not necessarily needing a lot to do it. So like, obviously there are the real hurdles of like having a camera and, all those things that of course require money. I think just understanding that even shooting it with your phone is okay. It's just like flushing out the ideas, I think, are what get you the attention. Like get the creative ideas out of your mind and into the world, and just keep making and working. Because that is going to get attention. I don't think, I think just like continuing to create is what's going to get that energy to you. And then I would get that email prepped to send to the people who you want to reach out to. Looking at some of the credits on the work that you're attracted to on some of the advertising websites to see who the team was on that work can help you understand who you should reach out to. So like the people we talked about earlier in the chat, like the creative director, the art producer or producer, those are the people you should. Exactly. Oh, thanks. That's perfect. And honestly, it's worth even reaching out to stylists you like, or hair and makeup, like getting those relationships established. Like, just like having the producer in mind that you want to reach out to, like you might jive with someone and then suddenly they're styling for free for you. Like those relationships are very real, even at the very highest level. A job comes in and it's unpaid and a super famous stylist will style it for you because they like working with you. And those, like, people will do favors and give you their time if they're driving with you and believe in your vision. So it's totally worth reaching out to like your network. So you've got like your stylist, hair and makeup, like those are great people to have around you. And you're like, oh, I got this job and I know exactly who I'm going to go to when that job comes. So understanding the teams for sure. And a lot of those websites like Adweek and oh God, I'm blanking on some of the other advertising websites. They'll put like all the credits of who worked on that job from the agency side in those on those pages. So that's a great resource. Also, LeBook, LEBOOK. They have a directory of new work. So you can see the images of the work, and then you can see the teams behind that work as well. So it's a really great resource. I go to that resource all the time because I'm like, oh God, I really need someone to shoot an interesting glass or something, and I'll be able to figure out like who's doing interesting still life with glass right now. So it's like one of those places that I always end up going.
Amazing. Thank you. And Alexa's putting you on the spot.
Yay! So beautiful.
This was the beautiful cover, part 1. There's a second cover that I can show in a second that Alexis just photographed for the March and April issue of Essence magazine. Alexis, you recently transitioned to doing a lot of commercial work over this past year. What insights do you have that we haven't covered? Just any, quick takeaways that you can share with us briefly before we go of, your time at working within this space, this world, I should say.
The first thing that comes to mind is ask for help. I ask Allie for things all the time. I ask Kate for things. I have a solid network of, 6, 7, 8 different people, agents, folks at agencies, other commercial photographers who are more established, lawyers. Like, ask for help and ask a lot of different people. That's the only way that I've been able to sort of wrap my head around like red flags or equitable terms or like pay that makes sense. And when I don't know, I just ask people. And a lot of people are really willing to share the information and give you the support that you need. The second most important thing is read those contracts. Read every single line twice. Things will slip past and then you can't go back and fix it later usually. So building that legal knowledge and the business side of your photography is going to do wonders so that you can focus on the creative aspect without the same stress and anxiety of trying to deal with, a work for hire agreement that slipped through or copyright issues and things like that.
Amazing. Any lasting thoughts before we go then? With that said, and actually I didn't even realize it's on newsstands today. Oh my goodness, gonna have to go and find that. That is so exciting. Congratulations. This is the second photo that she photographed for Essence for the cover. So any parting words?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I hope this was helpful. We hope to do another one of these. And if you feel like there was something or a subject that we didn't touch on today, let us know so that we can talk about it next time. And yeah, I thought that was such great insight, Alexis. I feel like asking people the questions it's going to give you the knowledge you need. You don't even know what you don't know sometimes. And I think you'd be surprised about how willing people are to just help you answer a question. And it can give you so much protection going into your jobs, understanding what you're getting yourself into and understanding the scope of the work and what's expected of you, so that your career can just continue to build and become more and more full.
Amazing. I think I found where you were talking about for inspiration. People are asking the book. I just randomly took a page from their site. I think that's the URL. And then Adweek was something else mentioned that I will drop on the site.
And then in terms of treatments too, yeah, maybe we can get into that next time for treatments.
Yeah, definitely.
There's so much good
Trust
meat
me, you guys.
there.
We had like 3+ pages of like notes. So we had a lot of notes, a lot of bullet points. Oh my goodness, we've met several times over the course of like 3+ months. We are trying to be very intentional with this. So it does take longer because, as you know, there's so much to talk about. Each subject really could be an hour on its own, and we already went over time. So this is just, the beginning. You can soak in all of this that you just heard, because I know there's a lot to like retain because it was all thrown at you. But the recording will be available later today. If you have friends who missed it, you can also let them know, and I can send them the recording. That way you can just run it back. And then you can let us know what else you want to hear in the next part. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you so much, Allie and Kate and Alexis.
So much.
For your knowledge. And we will do this again very soon.
Sounds great.
Thank you guys. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.